Hello, everyone. Welcome to Taking Action on Organic. This is the third in series of 3 webinars put on by the Edible Schoolyard Project in support of our new curriculum, Understanding Organic. My name is Nick Lee. I'm our Senior Program Manager, and I'm excited to be joined here today by Raquel Vigil, who's our Curriculum Specialist, by Wendy Johnson, who is a mentor to the Edible Schoolyard Program and an advisor on this curriculum, and by my colleague Russell Sturton, who is running the tech side of things for us this afternoon. So thank you to the 3 of you for being here, and thank you to everyone who's joining us from across the country and around the world for this webinar. We at the Edible Schoolyard Project are really fortunate to cultivate and harvest 1 acre of land in Berkeley, California. We take great care in stewarding that land, and we recognize that the land that we farm is unceded territory of the Chochenyo Ohlone people. If you'd like to share a land acknowledgement of your own, or for where you work or for where you reside, please go ahead and do so in the chat. If you're not familiar with the history of the place where you live or work, you can use the website native-land.ca to look up your location and learn a little bit more about the people who have stewarded and continue to steward the land in which you live. We encourage you to explore some resources that we're going to share in the chat that will encourage you to think about how you can use land acknowledgements and how to engage your students on considering the lasting legacy of settler colonialism. We'll also share these resources in a follow-up email as well. So this is our 3rd of 3 webinars within this Understanding Organic series. For those of you who were not present, the first one was really covering the introduction to the curriculum. It was opening up the curriculum with the opening that we offer to students, which is, what does organic mean? It's recognizing that organic has a technical legal definition, but it also has an emotional and personal definition to every person. And so we got to hear from Wendy and Raquel on their personal definitions of organic. The second webinar really covered the heart of the curriculum, the lessons that describe the values and the principles and the practices of organic and what that means for the gardens and the farms on which we work. And then this is the 3rd and final in this series of 3 webinars, which is really focusing on the conclusion of the curriculum, which is actually an opening for students to learn more and to begin to take action. I want to thank everyone for sharing their goals for this webinar in the registration. Somebody wrote that my goal is to take action in the garden and in life, to foster teen civic engagement. And that is exactly what we're aiming to do with this webinar. Somebody else wrote, I want to teach my students about the connection between food and social justice. And that is something that I think encouraging youth to take action will bend them towards social justice. They will take it in that direction. They are looking for justice in their lives. And then I also want to acknowledge that we had some people respond in that registration that they're looking for tips for starting a garden program. And while that's a really important goal, that is not going to be the focus of this webinar. We are going to share some resources in the chat right now and in our follow-up email that are great places for folks who are starting their journey of building a school garden or adding to the school garden at their campus. So Russell's going to share some resources in the chat right now from LifeLab and from the School Garden Project in Washington, D.C., which are really rich resources on starting school gardens. For those of you who are at the beginning of your journey, I encourage you to stick around for this webinar and to chat and learn from some of the other educators who are here today, and hopefully to learn from us as well. So our goals for today are to introduce and discuss the final project of this curriculum. We're going to dedicate most of our time to this final project and discussing social action projects for students. We'll also actually take the time to complete an exercise from the final project, one of the activities that we have students do, and you'll get to do that and then chat about that in a breakout room with some of your peers and colleagues here. The other piece that we're going to talk about is some of the extension lessons. This curriculum has a suite of extension lessons that aren't part of the core curriculum, but are optional lessons that you can use to extend the curriculum depending on your students' interests. Really quickly, I want to launch a poll and get a sense of who's in the room and what you're teaching and what your experience with this curriculum is so far. So I'm going to go ahead and launch this poll, and you should see a window pop up on your screen. You can just take a moment to complete those questions. I'm going to go ahead and share the results here. You should be able to see them on your screen. And you can see that we have a majority of garden educators here. That's awesome to see. We've got so many garden educators, along with a lot of program coordinators, some volunteers, and a few folks who have other roles. We've got a great mix across different grade levels. That's wonderful to see, with kind of a peak there in 6th to 8th grade, which is nice, as that's a lot of our focus as well at the Edible Schoolyard. We've got a mix of folks who have attended the other webinars and not. For those of you who missed some of the other ones, there are recordings that are available on our website. We'll be sharing those in the follow-up email. And we've got a couple people who have used curriculum materials and quite a few who have not yet. And we've got a few people who have led social action projects before. That's excellent. I really hope that you'll be willing to share some of your experiences with that later on. Thanks for taking that poll. So I'm going to jump in by actually talking about a social action project, a culminating project for a class that I led 3 years ago, before talking about the curriculum for this social action project. And I'm just going to start some photos from this and talk a little bit about what my students did in this year. So this was a public health career technical education class. And my students, at the end of a year of learning about cooking and public health, were given the prompt, what can you do to increase access to healthy food on campus? And they had a couple of weeks to work in groups and brainstorm and implement a project. I'm just going to share a couple photos and briefly describe some of the projects that some of the groups came up with. This first group here noticed that many students were hungry during the beginning periods of the school day, and that the school offered a free breakfast that was open to all students, universal free breakfast program, but they served oatmeal 5 days a week, and hardly anybody wanted to eat the oatmeal. And so these students worked with the school nutrition services team to test out a recipe and develop a recipe that met the nutrition requirements, that worked with the budget of the school nutrition services program. That was really delicious. And so what they came up with was a turkey sausage whole grain strata. So a strata is kind of like a frittata, but with bread chunks in it. And so it was whole grain bread mixed with egg, turkey sausage, and broccoli and cheese. And they prepared this turkey sausage strata and served it to their peers on a day. And that day saw nearly double the breakfast participation. And students were writing in, and they passed that recipe off to school nutrition services. This is another project from another group of students who noted that there was nowhere for students to get food to take home on campus, and that many of the students weren't just hungry during school hours, but were also hungry at home. And so this group of students actually partnered with a local food bank, the Berkeley Food Network, and invited them onto campus and hosted a pop-up pantry. So this was a pantry that my students hosted every other Friday, where the Berkeley Food Network supplied all of the food. And you can see it was a really popular event. We had some fresh produce from our garden mixed in with some of the produce and fresh foods that the Berkeley Food Network could provide, as well as shelf-stable foods like canned tuna and peanut butter and other really nutrient-dense dry goods. This next project was a fun one. Another group of students who frequently ate lunch at school really didn't like the bread. And so they actually went to school nutrition services and said, hey, get lunch every day, love it for the most part. The bread products aren't the greatest. And the purchasing sous chef, who is not pictured here, but this is our purchasing sous chef within Berkeley Unified, said, that's actually really timely. We're looking to switch vendors. We're looking to find new bread products to replace the ones that we're currently purchasing. And so he asked this group of students if they could be a focus group. And so they actually were the tasting panel for the district as the district shopped vendors and tried out new bread products. So this is my students in one of the production bakeries after a tasting. Again, you can see here, these guys were pretty excited to be in this bakery and to get to influence the purchasing of our school district and then to get to have tastier bread products. This was another group that was looking at breakfast, and again, noting that a lot of students were hungry. And what they noticed was that most students didn't have time, even when there was the hot oatmeal or the better hot strata breakfast available. Most students were racing onto campus with a few minutes to spare before first period. And so rather than having a sit-down hot breakfast, this group of students put together a grab-and-go kit. And so they worked again with student nutrition, or with nutrition services, to build a kit of a whole grain muffin, a carton of milk, and a piece of fresh fruit that would count as a reimbursable breakfast. And they had students just quickly jot down their student ID number as they walked through the gates and grab a breakfast. And this is something that nutrition services was actually looking to implement on an ongoing basis after this project. So again, that's two of my students, and then the sous chef, who's now the lead chef in the district. So I wanted to share those just as a couple examples of what students can do when they are given a prompt and given room to address it. So these were all responses to that question of what can you do to create more access to healthy food on campus? And these were completely student-led, student-driven projects that I was able to support with. So again, that's just an example. And now what we're going to do is we're going to dig into the final project that is the end of this curriculum, the end of the Understanding Organic curriculum. And I keep saying end, but it's really an opening. It's really a beginning. This curriculum is prompting students to think about what organic means to them, to consider their own opinions and their own beliefs around it, and also how the issues of organic impact their community. We have a number of practices throughout the course of the curriculum, like textual analysis, like reflection, like discussion, that get students to consider this all throughout the curriculum. And then we get to the end, and we're essentially asking them, now what? So you've thought about this, you've spent so much time learning and thinking about all of this. Now what do you do? What does it mean? Where do you want to go with this? And firstly, we have places for them to continue learning. We have a series of extension lessons that I want to share with you. And these extension lessons offer them a number of places to continue their learning. You can see that we have 12 different extension lessons here, and these range from a number of topics. They can learn about the indigenous origins of regenerative agriculture. They can dig into thinking about labor rights and learn about the story of the unionization of strawberry pickers at Swanton Berry Farm. They can actually take the time to go out into their local stores and map access to organic products to better understand where they can shop for organics in their own life, in their own community. They can interview family members and elders from their community to learn about the foodways and the important foods within their own history and heritage. There's also a series of articles that invite them to read and consider hot button issues within organic at the moment. Asking them to think about labeling and perceptions of organic, asking them to think about organic and agrotechnology and kind of the debate that's happening right now around whether there can be such a thing as an organic hydroponic system or a robotically farmed organic farm. Again, all of these are issues where we're not advocating that there's a right answer, but we're just encouraging our students to learn and think deeply about these issues. Now, the piece of this final project that we're really going to lean into and spend a lot of time in right now is the final project workbook. And this is the opening to a social action project. So a social action project is a large project. It's a multi-step project. It's something that will probably take weeks for students to do with student support, or for students to do with teacher support. And a social action project is a way for students to address issues or concerns that they have within their community. We don't actually map out a full social action project within this curriculum, but rather we provide a number of resources for teachers to learn about how to structure a social action project. So this document that I'm sharing right now on my screen is a teacher resource that has our thoughts on social action projects and how to organize them, but it also links to a number of really rich resources and large, well-documented examples of social action projects. So if this is something you're keen to do, I'd really recommend digging into this resource and learning more about social action projects. Again, every resource that I'm sharing on screen right now will be sent out in the follow-up email, so don't worry about jotting down URLs or capturing everything from the chat. One layer that we've added to this social action project is this thought that there's multiple forms of action, and we want our students to think about the different layers at which they can act. And so we've centered these concepts of personal action, participatory action, and then justice-oriented action. And just recognizing that students can act on these many different scales, recognizing their sphere of influence extends beyond their individual actions, beyond their individual purchasing power, and that they can work to organize or participate in something larger than themselves. And I think that that's an important part of their growth, and the growth of their agency is realizing that their actions are really powerful, that their purchasing choices have impact, but their actions and their abilities are really powerful ways to make change as well. I want to pause to see, Raquel, do you have anything that you'd want to add to this at this moment?
No, I mean, I think it might be nice to scroll to the second page, because part of that is really this lesson in particular, that's the lesson right before the final project, the introduction to the final project, really focuses on students thinking about and seeing examples from different communities of what the different forms of actions are, and sort of engaged in a dialogue around what are the threads that connect our personal, our justice oriented, and our participatory, and ways to sort of see how you enact change on these different scales and levels.
Raquel, if I'm hearing you correctly, one of the things you're mentioning is the other document, which I don't have pulled up here, which is a series of stories documenting different forms of action that nonprofits and individuals are taking within their own communities. And so in that sense, it's giving students stories and examples of what that action can look like on different scales that will help them think about what their own actions can be. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, I'll be sure to include that one in the follow-up email as well. So with all of this, we've put together, Raquel and her colleague Rachel actually have put together a workbook that sets students up for this final project. And we're going to spend about 10 minutes now actually running through that workbook page by page, because I think it's a really important resource that you can use or that you can pull from to support your students to think about what their ability, what their agency is, what types of actions they could take. So I'm going to switch my screen share over to this workbook here. We're actually just going to run page by page through this. Raquel, do you want to take this first one?
Yeah, so again, as Nick has described, that the final project is really sort of the beginning, and it's really just engaging even in the sort of a series of questions and activities that get students to think about these issues in the context of their own communities, in the context of what matters to them, to sort of be that first question that would ultimately become potentially a social action project. It sort of only even sort of, kind of just touches on that first question. And this sort of, the questions for critical action are these sort of sets of 4 questions that really guide the workbook, and they're sort of asked for students to consider throughout the different activities that the workbook proposes. The other thing to kind of keep in mind about this workbook in particular is, as a final project, we think about this project as a summative assessment, which means that we really want students not only to engage with the topics and find meaning making for themselves, but we really want them to practice some of the different instructional tools that they've learned throughout the curriculum. So there's a lot of things around textual analysis, around critical thinking, around dialogue. So a lot of these activities really include those different instructional strategies to emphasize, so that students are kind of taking the steps of the learning throughout the curriculum and extending that and kind of adding a more independent element for them to engage with. So these questions are things around what inspires you to take action on your topic. Who is doing work around your topic and what's interesting. So there's some sort of research aspect of it. What drives their work? What skills and resources do you have that could help you take critical action? So there's some self-reflection, many self-reflective pieces there. And then thinking about, really wanting students to think about the personal, sort of what is in their sphere of influence that they can do, and thinking along those larger scales of what is participatory, more community-oriented, what is justice-oriented, what are ways that you can imagine, how do you push on the levers that can change these structures beyond our communities or included with our communities.
This next worksheet is one that I love. It's titled Get Inspired, and it's really just offering students time and space to get connected to what moves them within organic and food justice. So it prompts them to go to a place that is meaningful to them, or that gives them inspiration, and then just sit and do some free writing on the topics of organics and food justice. And this is really just a generative place for them to think and brainstorm a bit.
And similarly, I think, again, a lot of these are really just meant to sort of be generative. I sort of felt that, in order to get to the place of asking the question, what do you want to enact change? There's so much about the generative process of just sort of exploring the meaning for yourself. So that these activities really do that. This one, titled What Roots You, is to sort of consider, what are your hopes for food justice or organic now that they've learned about that? What do you care about? What do you want to change? And sort of what grounds you? Why is this important to you? What are the values that matter to you here? What are the different family traditions or food traditions that come up for you that really center, for me in my own sort of as a young person in doing community organizing, was so essential that I remembered what rooted me and why it mattered to me, and kept that as a throughway. And it's really important to me to sort of hold that out as a really important piece of action for students, to remember that it's rooted in what their passion is and what matters to them.
And I think most of you are teachers and you work with youth and you know this, but these are proactive solutions to the problem, where you can ask a student, what do you want to do? What do you think you could do? And they sit at you and go, I don't know. And this is just really, as Raquel and I both said, generative ways to get them thinking, to get them creatively brainstorming ideas. So this next one, selecting a topic, invites them to look back at those last couple pages, as well as activities that they've done throughout the curriculum, reflecting on how those issues of organics that we've talked about throughout earlier lessons in the curriculum, how those impact their community. And this worksheet really helps them narrow that down to figure out one topic, and then begin to reflect on that and think, what have I learned? What do I know? And what do I want to know? So prompting them to look back, think about what they have already learned and where they need to learn more before diving in to build a project.
Great, awesome. And, this is really acknowledging that, in researching a topic, there's research involved with understanding a topic, right? So we really want to encourage students to look for primary sources. I mean, as a curriculum that touches on textual analysis, there's in the curriculum sort of different aspects that look at not media literacy, sort of understanding how to make sense of what we read. So this is students engaging in those textual analysis processes, but extending that a little bit further where they're doing some independent research. So they're looking at some different sources. So, on your topic, conduct, an internet search or some other things, or find some primary resources and really think about that notion in some of earlier in the curriculum, where we're really asking them to consider, well, how do we decide if a source is trustworthy? What helps us decipher whether or not there are facts that the source is sort of evaluating, and how they evaluate a text, and applying a critical thinking lens to how they're engaging with their research and with content and media.
This next worksheet, discussing your topic, basically invites them to have a conversation. And I really appreciate this worksheet because it recognizes that so often conversation is where thinking develops, is where ideas get fine-tuned, is where you say something and realize it's not actually what you truly mean to say, and that there's a little bit more nuance there. It's also an invitation for our students to talk with elders and others in their community and gain new perspectives on an issue, to complicate the ideas that they're thinking about, or to get, double checked on something that they're thinking about. So I love that this curriculum includes discussion and conversation as a way of advancing thought and moving forward on an idea.
Awesome. And sort of helping to students narrow down. So this is sort of looking at a resource or a worksheet that is developed and actually used early on. So the circles of connection is a lesson and and this worksheet in particular, a version of this worksheet is introduced in the preparatory unit. And it really is meant to sort of have students think about the topics and think about it in terms of themselves, their community, and beyond. And so it's a way to, again, to think about those scales, those sort of circles of influence, if you will, about the different issues and topics that are coming up. And it's also, throughout the curriculum, in a number of the lessons, a kind of closing reflection will have students actually use this worksheet again, and it'll introduce a sort of question that is a reflective question that engages in this worksheet that's particular to the topic of that lesson that you can find. So that's kind of threaded throughout the curriculum. So this is just sort of taking this practice that students would have engaged with and applying it directly to their topic. So it's then sort of a free exploration of thinking about, okay, well, what does this topic mean to me? What could this topic mean to my community? What are ways that I can change, ways to create change for myself, for my community, and beyond. And then it also sort of these arrows around impact and change in the earlier curriculum is just recognizing and holding out that, it can sometimes start with us, and it pushes out towards those kind of larger structural justice oriented change. And then also those larger structural change pushes in and has an impact and effect on ourselves and our community. So it's just another attempt for students, a way for students to sort of think and understand those different scales of action, and kind of where and how they want to push on the different levers, and valuing that work across all scales is important for change.
And then this last worksheet within this workbook is taking stock of the tools. And this is basically a form of asset mapping, encouraging students to look at their community, to look at the resources that they have themselves, to look at the people in their lives who might be able to help them, and to look at the skills and knowledge that they've accumulated already that will help them to enact a project. And so that is, and then there's just room for notes at the end of this. But this workbook is adaptable, right? I mean, you can see that it's an opening for students to then actually spend weeks completing a social action project, or it's a really powerful tool for reflection and consideration, even if they don't complete a project after completing the workbook. I think that it's a really valuable exercise that will help students build connection and engagement and commitment to issues that they care about, And it will help them deepen that care when they see that there are things that they could potentially do. As Raquel mentioned, it again serves as a summative assessment. After a student has completed this understanding organic curriculum, you can read through this and see how they've connected to these issues, how they understand the importance of organic based on their responses within this workbook. So it's a summative assessment that will help you understand what they've taken away from this curriculum as well. Raquel, is there anything else you would want to add before we move into doing one of those activities?
Don't think so. I think that's great.
Awesome.
I know that I guess the one thing I would add is the workbook does have the teacher version has a rubric, right? So part of that summative assessment is, if that's, to sort of evaluate or kind of less so evaluate, but have a sense of where students are at. There is a final project rubric that can kind of help the teacher and the students sort of track their learning along the engagement of those tools.
I can pull that up really quickly. So there's the rubric for that final project. And again, we'll share all of these materials in the follow-up email. Does anybody have any questions about this workbook before we dive into doing one of the activities within it? In that case, we are going to go ahead and do one of our activities, which is the What Roots You activity. So I'm gonna have my colleague Russell launch a screen share, and we're going to take 6 minutes to actually complete this exercise. You are going to write out your own hopes for food justice and organic, and you're going to write out what grounds you and inspires your hopes for food justice, whether those be family food traditions, values. What are the parts of you that build your commitment to organic and to food justice? Since you don't have a printed copy of this, you can just write down on a piece of paper, or you can sketch out your own strawberry plant there before adding your leaves and roots to it. Or if you're more comfortable taking notes on your computer, go ahead and do that. Well, what we're going to do here is we're going to play some music. I'm going to go ahead and turn my camera off and microphone off and encourage you to do the same, and we'll come back in 6 minutes. I hope that everyone enjoyed taking a moment to write about your own hopes and kind of dreams for food justice and organic. Raquel, did you want to talk about doing that as a teacher?
Yeah, I think it's really great. I love that we're, and I thank you everyone for sort of engaging with this worksheet. And I also just think that it's an interesting activity to do with your students. It's a great way to model for your students, and also to kind of break up that presumed role of a teacher and student. And I think it's really, great for, so I encourage you as the teacher to, do this workbook or this particular worksheet and activity along with your students, so that they can kind of see the things that matter to you as well.
So what we're going to do now is we're going to go into a breakout discussion. We're going to sort you into rooms, and in your breakout rooms, we'll ask that you share a very brief introduction, who you are, with your peers that you're in the room with, and then share one hope that you wrote about and one root that you wrote about. Once everyone has had a chance to share their name, one hope, and one root, if that doesn't take the full 12 minutes, then there's a few more kind of topics that you can run off of there, which are, you can reflect on how it felt to complete that activity. What did it feel like to engage with your own hopes and think about the experiences that root those hopes for you? Or you can discuss how you might implement this workbook with your students. Or you can share other examples of student-led projects, social action projects that you've seen or that you've led as a teacher. We're going to share these in the chat. The chat will migrate with you to your breakout room. So if you get to the breakout room and you're thinking, what are we supposed to talk about again? Just pull up the chat and those questions, those prompts will be there. And if you have any issues with getting sorted into a breakout room, just message me or Russell and we'll be able to help you into a breakout room. So again, we'll spend about 12 minutes there and then we'll loop back to as a whole group to discuss the final project just a little bit further. All right, let's go ahead and launch those breakout rooms. And it looks like we have everybody coming back from their breakout rooms. I see some smiles. I see a lot more people on video. That's awesome to see. So again, this was just one exercise from this final project workbook, and I think we can see that these activities have the potential for us as educators and hopefully for our students as well to deepen their connections and commitments to the issues related to organic and food access and food justice. We really hope that this project sets up engagement not just in school and in projects that they undertake with your supervision as their educator, but also for them to be an engaged citizen within their community, within their life, beyond their experience in school. And critically, we want this closing of this curriculum to help them round the corner from learning to doing, to taking action and to asking themselves, what are the actions that I can take given an injustice that I see, given an issue that I care about. Is just really prompting them to see themselves as somebody who can do something instead of as somebody who is passive and just sees something that is and goes on their way. Raquel, you had a note you wanted to say about the instruction of these activities.
Yeah, I mean, I love this conversation and I love all the words, and it just sort of, it feels like this kind of conversation is part of what roots me. So thank you so much. And just a little piece about instruction, the final workbook is sort of structured around it being a kind of self-guided, in some ways, project or individual project. But I really want to encourage you to think about what makes sense for your students. And sometimes that means that there are certain activities in the workbook that may make more sense for larger discussions, right? There's sort of a rapport that gets built as you have open dialogue in your classroom. So I encourage you to think about what sort of think about what activities maybe are small, large groups, small group, and then there's some real personal activities like this one, what roots you, maybe the sort of sit in a space that inspires you, some of those sort of direct questions, and then just other ways that you may encourage students to talk with each other or to sort of work with each other on different pieces of that. So just wanted to hold that out as some different strategies that you could use and engage with around the workbook.
Awesome. And on that, I'll add in terms of adapting it and scaling it to your students is that working with different age groups, obviously a social action project will look very different. The examples that I shared of my high school students would look different with middle school students, which is the other age group that I'm familiar in teaching, and that you may need to scaffold and provide more options and more closely guide them or support them in planning their project. But I think that the core concept of asking students what they want to do to affect change, to take action, can scale regardless of age, and is still a deeply empowering experience for students to see that they can take action, that they can make change. So again, I think the level of scaffolding, the level of support changes, but the core concept of encouraging students to take action remains the same across age groups. I think I want to pass it to Wendy Johnson, who has some words for us as we bring this webinar towards a close. We will have time for Q&A after this, but I want to pass it to you now, Wendy.
Thank you, Nick. What an extraordinary gift it's been to be together for these 3 sessions and to see the circle unfolding and always a little opening in that circle so fresh life can come in. Particularly, I'd like to express gratitude to Nick and Raquel and to everyone who's worked on this curriculum, and then to the beauty and the power of teachers at work in the world, and the opportunity to thank each and every one of you for your practice and for your for the gift of good teaching, and also in this particular environment for the gift of being together as students, learning from Nick and Raquel and others, assessment and inspiration, learning as we listened to Matt last week, learning as we listen at every point, and just gratitude for the gift of being able to learn and adapt and be in the real world. And this we're manifesting in very difficult times. I need not tell you. I'm older than most people in the circle. Just celebrated my 74th birthday, and I've been involved in this work for 50 years, growing food. So for me, when I say fervor, organic agriculture is life itself, and it's far more ancient than any system that has recently been devised. Although we're studying and understanding that organic agriculture, taking care of the earth, is a way to take care of this beautiful planet and all beings in the 10 directions that are present in it. And the group I'm the most comfortable with and the most grateful for is those who are always beginning new, fresh teachers, willing to be vulnerable, to say love together at the same time from opposite ends of the spectrum, and really come together. Poets say, whatever you have to say, leave the roots on, let them dangle, make clear where you come from. And in that kind of effort that has been so evident in all of you, new life and new learning happens. So real gratitude. There are particular points in organic agriculture that are so important to remember. And I know that Nick and Raquel are going to post some of the findings from the Climate Action Network right now, looking at how soil protection makes possible the sequestering and holding of carbon in the living earth. Practices of regenerative and indigenous-based agriculture help to increase that richness of ground. We know this throughout our whole body because we're made of all the elements of the garden. But to have an opportunity to thank you and to express gratitude and excitement for everything that you're generating is a real gift this evening. And I'm very thrilled to see how the program continues to unfold. So thank you everyone for your inspiration. We're here to mitigate damage, to be adaptive, and to be resilient. And it's a wonderful acronym, MAR, the deep ocean, El Mar, the deep, wide ocean of possibility is what it means to understand organic and to work across all different ranges of possibility to practice together and to generate good, healthy food for a hungry world. So thank you very much. Pass it back to Nick and Raquel. Thank you for including me.
Thank you, Wendy. And as you talk about all these different possibilities, I want to name a few other events that are coming up and opportunities that are coming up. Those of you who have been on previous webinars know that the Growing School Gardens Summit is going to happen for the first time in April in 2022 in Denver. That's going to be a large in-person conference put on by the School Garden Support Organization Network. Registration is open and the call for proposals actually closes tonight. So if you want to give a talk at that conference, get your proposal in tonight. School Garden Support Organization Network also has a webinar coming up later this month on the 17th. And that's going to be talking about regional support models for programs that support multiple school gardens in their region. That'll be on November 17th at 11 a.m. Pacific time. And then finally, as I mentioned in the previous webinars, University of Texas at Austin is running a large study right now on school garden sustainability. And they are asking for respondents to participate in this survey. And once they publish their findings and their results, they'll actually offer individualized advice for respondents based on their findings and your survey responses. So check out that survey if you haven't already. On the mention of surveys, we have a survey about this webinar. As always, our surveys are helping us improve our programming, helping us fund our programming so that we can offer more webinars, more curriculum development, and continue to support you, educators around the country and world. So please take a moment to take our survey. And again, as Wendy was saying, just thank you all for being here. Thank you all for the work that you're doing to advance organics and to teach the youth about sustainable and regenerative farming techniques and food, and for being here and being part of this conversation.